I've been lurking on this sub for years, reading other people's confessions and telling myself I'd never be the guy who posted one. But here I am. I'm William, and this is about the worst thing I ever did, not because it was the biggest crime on paper, but because it came from a place I didn't recognize in myself at the time. Jealousy. The kind that crawls under your skin and whispers dumb, dangerous ideas until they sound reasonable. This happened years ago, back when I thought I had my life mostly figured out. I was in a long-term relationship, stable job, same friend group I'd had since my 20s. One of those friends, let's call him Eric, was everything I was insecure about, charming, effortlessly confident, the kind of guy who never seemed to try and still got what he wanted. When my partner started laughing a little harder at his jokes, texting him a little more than me, I told myself I was being paranoid. Spoiler, I wasn't handling it well. The crime itself wasn't some mastermind-level thing. It was impulsive, personal, and rooted in the need to feel like I wasn't being replaced. I didn't wake up one morning planning to cross a line. I walked up to it slowly, step by step, telling myself I was just protecting what was mine. That lie is important, because it's the one that made everything else possible. I'm not posting this for sympathy. I'm posting it because that one jealous decision cost me relationships, sleep, and a version of myself I can't get back. If you're still reading, just know this: jealousy doesn't feel dangerous when it starts. It feels justified. And that's what makes it so damn expensive. Before anyone asks why I didn't just talk to my partner like a normal adult, yeah, I know. I replay that choice a lot. At the time, though, I was drowning in assumptions. Every unanswered text felt intentional. Every late night felt like confirmation. I didn't have proof of anything concrete, just patterns my brain stitched together into a story that painted me as the fool. Eric and I had known each other for years. We'd borrowed tools, shared beers, crashed on each other's couches. That made it worse. Betrayal hits harder when it's familiar. I started paying attention to small stuff: how he'd linger after group hangouts, how he'd show up uninvited with some excuse that sounded rehearsed. I convinced myself he was testing boundaries I was too weak to enforce. Instead of confronting either of them, I went inward. I journaled, bad idea, in hindsight, writing out scenarios where I took control. Control became my buzzword. If I could just control the situation, I'd feel steady again. That's when the idea first showed up, not fully formed, more like a suggestion: prove he's not as perfect as everyone thinks. I told myself it wouldn't hurt anyone. I told myself it was temporary, reversible, even deserved. That's the slippery thing about jealousy: it doesn't shout. It calmly lays out a case, like a lawyer who only presents evidence that favors their side. By the time I started thinking about logistics, I already felt morally justified. And once you cross that line in your head, the rest feels like follow-through. The shift from thought to action was quieter than you'd expect. No dramatic "I'm doing this" moment. Just a night where I couldn't sleep and found myself mentally rehearsing things instead of counting sheep. If I'm honest, that's when it stopped being hypothetical. I wasn't angry anymore, I was focused. That scared me later, but at the time it felt like clarity. Eric was predictable. That's something you only notice when you're watching someone too closely. Same gym schedule. Same bar on Thursdays. Same habit of parking on the side street because he said it was easier to get out. I told myself I wasn't stalking him. I was just observant. That distinction mattered to me then. It let me feel like I was still a decent person doing a questionable thing for a good reason. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted leverage. Something that would knock him off the pedestal without blowing back on me. I spent days thinking through outcomes, playing out worst-case scenarios, convincing myself I had thought of everything. I took small precautions, left my phone at home during certain walks, avoided places where people knew me too well. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would stand out if someone looked back later. Or so I thought. What I didn't account for was how planning changes you. Every step I took made the next one easier. I started feeling detached, like I was watching myself from a distance, impressed by how calm I was. That calm wasn't confidence, it was suppression. And once you suppress doubt long enough, it stops trying to warn you at all. By the time I realized I was committed, I was already rearranging my days around the plan. That's the part that still unsettles me, how normal everything looked from the outside. I went to work, joked with coworkers, cooked dinner. Inside, though, my mind was running a parallel track, ticking off mental boxes. I chose a moment that felt safe. Not dramatic, not public. I kept telling myself I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, just expose something. That word again. Expose. It sounds noble until you admit you're really just trying to tip the scales back in your favor. I rehearsed what I'd say if things went sideways, how I'd explain my presence, my intentions. I even practiced sounding casual in my head, which is ridiculous in hindsight. There was a weird thrill in the secrecy. I hated that part of myself but also fed it. Every small decision, what to wear, when to leave, which route to take, felt loaded with meaning. I remember pausing before I left my place, keys in hand, thinking, if I sit back down right now, this all stops. I didn't sit back down. That's something people don't talk about enough, the last quiet moment before you do something you can't undo. No alarms. No voice from the sky. Just you, your justification, and the door closing behind you. The moment I actually put the plan into motion, my body reacted before my brain did. Hands shaking, mouth dry, heart beating like it was trying to escape my ribs. All that calm I'd been so proud of evaporated the second I was standing there, watching things line up the way I'd predicted. Real life has weight to it. Sounds are louder, time stretches weirdly, and every decision feels irreversible. I remember thinking, this is it. You're officially the bad guy now. Not in a dramatic, movie villain way, but in a quiet, disappointing sense. Like realizing you've disappointed a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. Still, I kept going. Momentum is powerful, especially when turning back means facing your own cowardice. Something small went wrong almost immediately. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to remind me I wasn't in control the way I'd fantasized. A delay? An unexpected presence. I had to improvise, and that's when fear really set in. Planning is comforting because it's theoretical. Improvisation means consequences are seconds away instead of abstract. I caught a glimpse of Eric during all this, completely unaware, relaxed, trusting the world in a way I no longer could. That should have stopped me. Instead, it hardened something in me. I told myself this was necessary. That whatever discomfort I was feeling was the price of setting things right. That's the lie I was clinging to as everything tipped from idea into action, and there was no pretending anymore that this was harmless. Once things were moving, time did this strange stutter step. Some moments felt stretched thin, like I could see every detail, the way the air smelled, the hum of a distant car, while others vanished completely. I'm missing pieces even now, which scares me more than remembering too much. It's like my brain decided certain parts weren't safe to archive. People were closer than I expected. That was the biggest miscalculation. Not right there, but close enough that every noise made my pulse spike. I started interpreting everything as a threat, footsteps, a cough, a door opening somewhere nearby. My body was screaming at me to stop, to abort, but my mind kept pushing forward because stopping meant facing what I was doing without the shield of adrenaline. When it finally happened, when the thing I'd built up in my head actually crossed into reality, I didn't feel triumph. I felt hollow. There was no rush, no vindication. Just a sinking realization that whatever balance I thought I was restoring didn't exist. I hadn't fixed anything. I'd only added a new, uglier layer to the situation. I remember looking around afterward, half expecting someone to be staring straight at me, pointing, calling me out. No one did. The world kept going. That normalcy was unsettling in its own way. It made the whole thing feel surreal, like I'd slipped into a timeline where I was capable of this, and now had to live there. That's when I understood something too late. committing the act was only the beginning. The real damage was about to start, and it was going to live inside me long after the scene itself was gone. I left the scene trying to look normal, which is laughable because when you're hiding something like that, everything feels like a tell. I kept my pace steady, didn't run, didn't rush. Inside, though, I was unraveling. Every passing face felt like a potential witness, every sound like an accusation forming behind me. What messed with me most was how ordinary the world looked. People chatting, phones glowing, someone laughing way too loudly at nothing. I wanted the universe to react somehow, to signal that something had gone wrong. It didn't. That silence felt heavier than shouting ever could. I didn't see Eric again that day, but his presence lingered. I kept replaying his expressions from earlier, trying to retroactively assign meaning. Was there suspicion? Had I imagined the trust? Paranoia set in fast. I scrubbed my hands longer than necessary, changed clothes twice, wiped down things that didn't need wiping. None of it helped. You can't disinfect a decision. That night, my phone buzzed and my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't him. It wasn't my partner either. Just a spam notification, meaningless and cruel in its timing. I realized then that I was officially living in the after, the part of the story where you wait to see if consequences find you or not. And waiting, it turns out, is its own kind of confrontation. I thought if I just stayed quiet long enough, the whole thing would settle into the background of my life. That was my first mistake after the crime itself, believing silence equals safety. What actually happened was that silence gave my thoughts room to mutate. A couple days later, subtle changes started popping up. Conversations felt loaded. Innocent comments sounded like veiled accusations. Eric was suddenly more distant, or maybe he always had been and I was only noticing now. My partner asked casual questions that sent my stomach into free fall. "Hey, did you run into Eric this week?" Normal question. Absolutely devastating delivery. I started constructing explanations preemptively, just in case. Little lies stacked on top of each other, each one requiring maintenance. I'd rehearse them in the shower, in the car, lying awake at night. It's exhausting keeping track of a version of reality that only exists to protect you from yourself. The worst part was realizing I couldn't talk about it with anyone. Not to defend myself, not to confess, not even to complain. I had locked myself inside my own head, and the walls were closing in. Every time I thought I'd gotten away with it, another moment would surface that made me think, no, this is when it all falls apart. That's when I learned something important. Consequences don't always arrive with sirens or confrontations. Sometimes they creep in as anxiety, as distance, as the slow erosion of trust you haven't technically lost yet, but know you deserve to. The first real confrontation didn't happen the way I expected. No shouting, no accusations, no dramatic reveal. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it worse. Eric pulled me aside after a group hangout, said he wanted to ask me something. Just hearing that sentence made my ears ring. He didn't accuse me outright. He asked if I'd noticed anything weird lately. His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. He talked around the issue, circling it like he was trying to decide whether to trust his instincts or dismiss them. I nodded a lot, offered vague agreement, played the role of concerned friend. The whole time, I felt like I was balancing on a wire, one wrong word away from falling. What struck me most was that he looked genuinely unsettled, not angry. That cracked something in me. I'd painted him as this villain in my head, smooth, manipulative, deserving of whatever came his way. Standing there, I saw a guy who was confused and maybe a little scared. That didn't fit the story I'd been telling myself, and my brain scrambled to rewrite it on the fly. Afterward, I went home and sat in my car for a long time before going inside. I realized I wasn't afraid of being caught as much as I was afraid of being known. If he connected the dots, he wouldn't just see what I did, he'd see why I did it. The jealousy, the insecurity, the smallness. That felt more damning than any consequence I'd imagined. That was the moment I understood how thin my cover really was. Not because someone had proof, but because truth has a way of pressing outward, even when you bury it deep. After that conversation, something in me snapped, not loudly, just a quiet fracture. I started living in the echo of what I'd done. Every interaction replayed with a delay, like I was hearing myself speak from a few seconds outside my body, checking for cracks in the performance. I laughed when expected, nodded at the right times, but none of it landed. I felt like a guest in my own life. Sleep got weird. Either I couldn't fall asleep at all, or I'd crash hard and wake up with my heart racing, convinced I'd said something incriminating in a dream. The adrenaline that carried me through the act had nowhere to go now, so it turned inward. Anxiety became my default setting. Even good moments felt suspicious, like calm before a storm I knew I deserved. Guilt showed up in unexpected ways. Not dramatic remorse, no sobbing on the floor, but this low-grade nausea whenever Eric was mentioned. Whenever my partner smiled at me, trusting and unaware, I felt a tightness in my chest that bordered on panic. I'd wanted control, but what I got was constant self-surveillance. I became my own warden. The strangest part was the absence of relief. I'd imagined that once it was done, I'd feel steadier, more secure. Instead, jealousy didn't disappear, it just evolved. Now it was tangled with fear and self-loathing, feeding on itself. I'd committed the crime to quiet a voice in my head, and all I'd done was give it more material. That's when it hit me, even if I was never caught, I'd still be serving a sentence. And I was the one enforcing it. The longer time passed, the more fragile my version of events became. Not because anyone challenged it directly, but because lies don't age well. They warp. I'd forget what I'd said to whom, catch myself hesitating over simple questions, over explaining things no one had asked about. Subtle stuff, but subtlety is exactly what people notice when they're already uneasy. My partner started pulling back in small, deniable ways. Less eye contact. Fewer spontaneous plans. At first, I blamed Eric, then work stress, then myself in that vague, "we're just in a funk" way. But deep down, I knew I was leaking something. Guilt has a smell to it. You don't notice it on yourself, but others do. I tried to justify everything again, like rewinding to the beginning and reselling myself the original lie. You were protecting your relationship. You were pushed into this. Anyone would have done the same. The problem was, I no longer believed it. The facts hadn't changed, but my ability to defend them had worn thin. There was one night I almost confessed. Not dramatically, just sitting on the edge of the bed, words right there. I pictured the fallout in real time, the silence, the questions, the way trust collapses all at once. I couldn't do it. Cowardice won again, dressed up as not wanting to hurt anyone. That's when I realized something bleak but honest. After the crime itself, every decision I made was about minimizing my discomfort, not repairing damage. And that realization hurt more than the fear of being caught ever did. In the end, I wasn't exposed by evidence or a confession. The truth came sideways, through consequences I couldn't control anymore. Eric stopped showing up altogether. Group chats went quiet. Plans happened without me. No explanation, no confrontation, just a slow social disappearance that felt deliberate. I later found out, through a mutual friend, that something had surfaced. Not proof pointing directly at me, but enough inconsistencies, enough dots loosely connected, that my name hovered in the background. No one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. So instead of a trial, I got exile. And somehow, that felt worse. My partner eventually asked me straight up if there was anything I wanted to tell them. Not accusing. Just tired. That question carried more weight than any threat could have. I denied it. Not aggressively, just quietly, decisively. I watched something close in their eyes when I did. That was the moment I knew I'd lost them, even though the relationship technically limped on for a bit after. I wasn't arrested. I wasn't publicly shamed. I got away with it. In the most useless sense of the phrase. No legal consequences, no dramatic ending. Just a shrinking world and a growing understanding that avoidance has its own price. And it charges interest. That was the resolution, I guess, not justice, not redemption, just the bill coming due in smaller, more personal ways. Once the dust settled, if you can call that quiet erosion, settling, I was left with myself in a way I'd never experienced before. No enemy to blame. No urgent crisis to react to. Just a long stretch of time where I had to live with the version of me that made those choices. I started noticing changes in how I moved through the world. I second-guessed everything. Compliments felt undeserved. Trust felt like a resource I'd already spent. Even in unrelated situations, I caught myself calculating outcomes, watching people too closely, wondering how easy it would be to slide into manipulation again. That scared me more than the original act. It meant this wasn't a one-off mistake, it was something I was capable of. I pulled back from people, partly out of shame, partly out of fear of repeating the pattern. Isolation felt safer. If jealousy was the spark, proximity was the fuel. So I kept my distance and told myself it was maturity, growth, self-control. Some of it probably was. Some of it was just avoidance with better branding. There were moments, standing in line somewhere, driving late at night, when the memory would hit me out of nowhere. Not the details, but the feeling, that hollow certainty that I'd crossed a line and couldn't uncross it. No amount of time made that go away. It just dulled, like a scar you stop touching but always know is there. That's when I realized the real aftermath wasn't losing friends or a relationship. It was losing the easy belief that I was a good person by default. From then on, goodness felt like something I had to actively choose, and actively protect, from myself. Time did what it always does, it moved on without asking whether I was ready. New routines replaced old ones. Different faces filled the spaces where familiar ones used to be. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd adjusted fine. New job eventually, new apartment, new social circles that didn't know the old story. A soft reset? But resets don't erase save files. They just stop you from seeing them all the time. The biggest cost wasn't what I lost back then, it was what I stopped allowing myself to build afterward. I kept people at arm's length. Whenever jealousy flickered, even mildly, I shut things down fast, sometimes unfairly. I'd rather walk away early than risk becoming that version of myself again. That caution saved me from repeating the mistake, but it also robbed me of intimacy. I didn't trust my emotions, so I treated them like liabilities. I also stopped telling myself comforting lies about intent. I learned the hard way that good intentions don't neutralize bad actions. You don't get credit for what you meant to do, only for what you actually did. That realization was sobering, but necessary. It stripped away excuses I'd leaned on my whole life. In a strange way, that crime became a reference point. Every hard decision afterward got measured against it. Is this honest? Is this about fear? Am I trying to control something that isn't mine to control? I didn't become better overnight, but I became more aware. And awareness, while uncomfortable, was the only real consequence that stuck. The story didn't end with punishment or forgiveness. It ended with accountability that never fully goes away. If there's a reason I finally wrote this, it's not to unburden myself. This isn't that kind of absolution. It's because jealousy is one of the few emotions that can make you feel righteous while you're doing damage. Anger announces itself. Greed looks ugly. Jealousy puts on a suit and tells you you're just defending your dignity. What I learned, too late, is that control is a trap. The moment you start believing you're entitled to manage other people's choices, you're already standing on the edge of something you can't justify later. Talk early. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Risk looking insecure instead of becoming someone you don't recognize. Silence doesn't keep the peace. It just gives your worst instincts time to prepare. I didn't go to jail. I didn't get publicly exposed. But I live with a clear understanding of what I'm capable of under the right pressure, and that knowledge doesn't fade. It sharpens. It forces responsibility. Maybe that's the lesson I had to earn the hard way. If you're reading this and you feel that tight, buzzing certainty that you're about to do something to fix a situation, pause. Sit with the discomfort. Bring someone else into it. Walk away if you have to. The cost of restraint feels high in the moment, but it's nothing compared to the interest you'll pay on regret. That impulsive crime of jealousy cost me more than it ever gave me. If there's any redemption in this story, I hope it's that someone else stops one step earlier than I did.